Hi friends, it's Pastor Andy here again from Yakima First Baptist Comunidad Cristiana. Just again talking about issues in America, issues in the United States, and this upcoming election, and just the choice that we have in front of us. And so I hope you watched my first video, give you a little bit more of a background. What I want to talk about today is the foundation of our government in the United States and its relationship to faith, religion. Again, this is a really big subject, and my intention here is not to exhaust the subject or give you every argument, for or against something, but just to give you some thoughts to think about, and maybe a little bit different perspective. And again, just ask you to consider. I'm 63 years old. I'm been American born and raised, and America is changing, and not all for the better. In fact, mostly for the worse, I think. And so the things that we're seeing around us today, raise a lot of questions. And one of the issues, I mentioned last time, the issue of God and people trying to get God out of society. And so that relates kind of to the whole issue of separation of church and state, and the foundation of our government. And was government meant to tolerate religion? Was religion supposed to never be in government? All that kind of stuff. What is the relationship between faith and politics? And so that's kind of the core subject that I want to address right now. But as a part of that, I want to address like even our form of government. And that's really critical. And again, I hope that younger people will take the time to do some studies, some research on the Constitution, on our founding fathers. Because from what I'm seeing, civics and government, as I was taught, is not being taught in school anymore. And we don't see and hear about, the founding fathers and their faith, and, some of the original papers that were written and arguments that were had about the Constitution and the founding of our government. These are critical issues for us, because if you don't understand, and you think America is, for instance, let's talk about the difference between a democracy and a republic. Do you even know that our government is a republic and not a democracy? We are a democratic republic, meaning that we do vote people into positions of authority as representatives of us, but those people are bound to a law, to a rule of law, which is the Constitution. So the fact that we have a Constitution that governs our behavior as a people, as governing officials over land, that makes us a republic instead of a democracy. A true democracy is just popular vote. And popular vote is popular vote. And so anything goes. And so you hear it over and over and again that, we are constantly being called a democracy. Like, is this a democracy? Well, then we should be able to do this. We should vote this, or we should vote that. No, that's part of the lies and the deception that's going on, is that people don't understand. No, we are not a democracy. We are a republic that our founding fathers, spent enormous time and energy crafting the Constitution in order to be able to lay out the structure of a government that would last. Because a democracy that is just based on popularity is destined to fall, and in a terrible, awful way. And all you need to do is go look at some of the previous attempts, even back as far as Rome. I mean, Rome was a democracy for a very brief period of time. It was a republic also. Then it became a democracy when the Caesars were able to do the crowd control to basically get themselves put in power. And as soon as they were in power, they claimed it all and became dictators, and the democracy was gone. So we're heading down that same path if we're not careful. Is that the foundation of the republic is being eroded, and that people are wanting to, make it so that we can vote in new things, change the Constitution, do this and do that. And what they don't realize is that they're actually destroying the very fabric of our country. So that's the first point. The second point is our founding fathers knew that what they created was a very fragile situation. And one of the founding fathers, I believe it was Benjamin Franklin, said that the government and the freedom of our government was meant for people who were self-governing. Okay, so in other words, you can't entrust a democratic republic to people who cannot control themselves. When people aren't willing to make tough choices, to do the right thing no matter what, to honor their neighbor, to honor one another's property, to take responsibility for their country and do the things that must be done because they understand that it must be done that way. If people aren't coming from that place in order to establish and, forward the government, but they're only coming from a what I want, and if I can get enough people to want what I want, then we can vote it in, we're doomed. And so this country and this government that we have, the republic, is based on self-government, that we need to be responsible for ourselves and not look to the government to do things for us that we should be doing for ourselves, number one. Number two is that it's not a popularity contest. It's not if enough of us say we want it, we get it. No, we have to go back to the Constitution, and we have to recognize the issues that are at stake within our government that set us apart, that make us who we are and who we have been for over 250 years, or nearly 250 years, in order to be able to keep what we've had. And that's really, really at risk right now. And so, please understand and go back and do the research. If you don't have to take my word for it, but go back and read the original documents and what is said there. The other thing is, our founding fathers clearly understood that God was in the picture. Yes, not all of them were Christians, but even those who weren't Christians acknowledged the supreme being, the God of nature. There are 4 references to God in the Declaration of Independence that say that we ask Him to help us with this endeavor that we're approaching, that we appeal to the God of nature and the laws of nature for the basis of the government that we're establishing. And George Washington was a devout Christian. Many others were, and they brought that into their work in establishing our government. And they drew so many of the laws and the basis of the law from biblical references and biblical standards and laws. And in fact, the Judeo-Christian legal systems, the systems right out of the Old Testament, were much of the basis for our government. And if you did the research, you would discover that. And so to try to say that, America, is not religious or, is not Christian or whatever else, that is utterly not true. Again, do your homework. Of course, not everybody that came to America was a Christian. And not everybody who came to America loved God or followed God. But by and large, it was a Christian nation and was intended to be so because it was actually established for the freedom of religion. Go look up the Mayflower Compact. Okay, people escaped Europe and the oppression of rulers for their religious beliefs in order to be able to come and have the freedom to pursue God as they saw fit in any manner. And that's why the First Amendment exists. The First Amendment exists to keep the state from interfering with the church. And we've got that all backwards now. We think that, we hear this phrase, separation of church and state, and what we think that means, or the way that people are putting that forward today, is that the church should not interfere with politics. No, that's not what was intended at all. That what was intended was to say that the politics, the government, should not overreach and interfere with the church. Our founding fathers recognized that the church, under God, one nation under God, that the relationship with God was actually the primary relationship, and the state needs to come second to that and acknowledge the role and authority of the church in society, in people's lives, and not interfere with that. And so this phrase of separation of church and state, which Joe Biden has referred to as being enshrined in the Constitution, isn't anywhere in the Constitution. In fact, it's only a letter. It's a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to a friend referring to the issue of the government not interfering with the church, and therefore there should be separation of church and state. But again, he meant it as the government should not interfere with the church. And as a Christian, as I said in my introductory video, we understand that God's rule and reign is above man and anything in this world. And so it's absurd, especially when we as Christians pray every day, or however often you pray the Lord's Prayer, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It would be absurd to think that as we pray that prayer every day, that what we don't mean is that God doesn't have anything to do with politics. How is his will ever going to be done on earth as it is in heaven if his will and faith and Christianity and the Bible have nothing to do with politics? No, that's absurd. No, God's will and his reign need to come in and influence every part of life, including politics. It needs to influence education. It needs to influence education. It needs to influence government. It needs to influence family. It needs to influence the church, which that needs more of God. But it needs to influence everything in society. And that's what we mean when we pray the Lord's Prayer. It's also what Jesus meant when he gave us the Great Commission in Matthew 28, 18 to 20. He said, go into all the world and make disciples of nations, teaching them to observe or practice everything I've taught you. What is he saying? He's saying, help people to understand what I've taught you and help them to do it. Like, make everybody disciples so that everybody follows what I've taught you. Is that only like in your home or only, in your heart, in your, prayer room? No, of course not. That's absurd. The idea was that Jesus was coming to establish his rule and reign in the earth, and he started with the church, calling us the ecclesia, the called out ones who were called to set up this new government on the earth that would teach people what Jesus's and God's government was all about, his will being done on earth as it is in heaven, and then we would go out and teach people how to do that. And so if we're going to do that, then it's going to go from the inside out, inside our own hearts, to my life, how I live, how I do my marriage, how I raise my kids, how I conduct my finances, how I conduct my business, how I'm educating my kids, and now into government policy, the city, the state, and the federal government. So as Christians, we should believe that God's will, his teachings, need to come down to earth and be done on earth as they are in heaven, interfering, interceding, and invading, if you will, every part of earth's society. And so again, the idea that there should be separation of church and state is really absurd when you think about it from that perspective. So I hope that there's some continuity there. I hope maybe I've given you something to think about, and just in terms of where our government is at. And come on, if there is a God, if you believe there is a God, and again, we answer to him ultimately, and we pray that his will be done on earth as it is in heaven, then isn't it obvious and natural that we should say that his will, his influence should come into every area of society, including government, and that it's government that should be held accountable to God, not government trying to get us accountable to it, even in our faith and religion? No. So stay tuned. Maybe we'll touch on this issue again. But again, share, like, make a comment. We'll have a conversation. Okay? Thanks. See you next time.